Paul is often faulted for not saying more about Jesus than he says. He doesn't talk about Jesus' baptism, his temptation, his Sermon on the Mount, his exorcisms, his triumphal entry, and lots of other things. He's faulted for not saying more on the grounds that if he knew more, he would have said more. That's possible, but it's not really probative. If you take 7 of my mother's letters, my mother is a very, very devout Christian. If you take 7 of her letters about religion, about her Christianity, about her faith, about her beliefs, you will not find any references to Jesus' baptism, temptation, Sermon on the Mount, exorcisms, or triumphal entry. She just doesn't talk about those things in her letters, and either did Paul. Does it show that my mother doesn't believe those things about Jesus' life? No, it doesn't show that. It's not what she is talking about. These letters that we have of Paul are letters that Paul wrote to his congregations to deal with problems that they were having. If they weren't having problems, then he didn't write about them in his letters. What does Paul say? Paul tells us a number of important things about the historical Jesus based on what he knew. He indicates that Jesus was actually born physically, that he had a woman as his mother, that he came from the line of King David, that he was born a Jew, that he was a Jewish Messiah, that he had brothers. One of them was named James. He preached to other Jews. He had 12 disciples. One of them was Peter, whom Paul knew. Jesus was a teacher. Paul explicitly cites several of Jesus' teachings. Jesus had a Last Supper with his disciples. Jesus was crucified by the ruling authorities at the instigation of the Jewish authorities. Paul tells us these things. I want to focus on 2 points in particular that Paul states about Jesus. The first is one that is central to many of the debates about mythicism. It comes in Galatians chapter 1, verse 19, where Paul says that 3 years after his conversion, so this would be, by my chronology, about the year 35 or 36, the Common Era, he says, after 3 years, I went to Jerusalem to visit Cephas. I remained with him for 15 days. Cephas is Peter, Jesus' closest disciple. But I saw none of the other apostles except James, the Lord's brother. The brother of the Lord. Paul knows Jesus' brother, and he knows Jesus' closest disciple, Cephas. The word brother in the New Testament always means one of 2 things. A brother means a blood relative who's born to the same mother. That's one of the things it means. In other words, it means what brother means. The second thing it means is it sometimes often refers to members of the same believing community who stand in close solidarity. And so you can talk about your brothers, Jewish brothers, Christian brothers, depending on what your faith commitments are. Those are the 2 things that brother means in unambiguous cases in the New Testament. If anyone wants to claim that the word brother means something else, in any context, they're free to do that, but they need to have clear and compelling reasons for thinking so, other than the fact that they don't want to think that the word means what it means. In Paul's case, when he says that James was the brother of Jesus, what does he mean? He cannot mean simply that he was somebody who stood in close solidarity with Jesus, because he's contrasting James with Cephas. He's explaining that he met with Cephas and with the brother of the Lord, James. In other words, Cephas is not the brother of the Lord. You get the same phenomenon in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 5, where Paul says that other people are allowed to take their wives with them, and so he too should be allowed to do so. Paul should be allowed to do so because other people take wives with them on their missions. And he says that Cephas doesn't, Apollos doesn't, Paul himself doesn't, but the brothers of the Lord do. That means that none of the others are the brothers of the Lord. Paul knew James. He spent weeks with James. He knew Peter, Jesus' closest disciple. If Jesus didn't exist, then surely his best friend and his brother would know about it. They didn't know about it because he did exist.